Anjali Verma believed she had survived the hardest chapters of her life, but the moment she trusted Raghav Mehta, everything she had built began to collapse. At 40, she was careful, disciplined, and emotionally guarded, yet one calculated promise of marriage was enough to pull her into a web of lies that would drain her savings, shatter her dignity, and awaken a rage she never knew she possessed. Raghav Mehta was not the successful businessman he claimed to be. He was a professional manipulator who turned hope into a weapon. What began as a quiet search for companionship would spiral into obsession, deception, and a deadly act of revenge that no amount of planning could undo. Anjali Verma had reached an age where life felt stable on the surface, but empty underneath. At 40 years old, she lived alone in a modest apartment in a quiet Indian neighborhood, following the same routine every day. Her mornings began early, her evenings ended in silence, and her weekends passed without excitement. Years earlier, her marriage had ended quietly, without scandal, but with lasting emotional damage. Since then, she had chosen distance over attachment, believing that self-respect mattered more than companionship. She worked as an accounts manager at a mid-sized firm, known for her honesty and discipline. Colleagues trusted her with sensitive responsibilities, and her employers admired her reliability. Financial security was something she had built slowly, rupee by rupee, after learning painful lessons from her past. She avoided risks, trusted paperwork more than people, and believed that truth always protected those who followed rules. This belief shaped her decisions and gave her a false sense of safety. Despite her independence, loneliness pressed heavily on her. Family gatherings became uncomfortable as subtle questions about marriage and children followed her everywhere. Friends her age were busy with spouses and growing families, leaving little space for her in their lives. Nights were the hardest, filled with quiet thoughts and unanswered questions about what her future would look like. She wondered if life would remain this way forever. When she finally considered the idea of remarriage, it was not driven by desperation, but by hope. She wanted stability, respect, and emotional security, not passion or fantasy. Online matrimonial platforms appeared safe and practical, filled with profiles promising seriousness and shared values. To Anjali, it felt like a controlled environment where honesty was expected and deception was unlikely. She believed she was cautious enough to protect herself, unaware that the very qualities she trusted most would. The profile appeared ordinary yet reassuring, exactly the kind of match Anjali believed suited her stage of life. The man presented himself as well-educated, financially stable, and deeply respectful of family traditions. His photographs showed a calm and confident presence, someone who seemed settled and trustworthy. There was nothing flashy or dramatic about him, which made the profile feel genuine. For Anjali, this simplicity felt like proof of honesty rather than a warning sign. Their initial online interactions felt balanced and thoughtful. He appeared patient, never rushed emotional topics, and showed interest in her daily life, her work, and her values. The attention felt comforting instead of overwhelming. After years of emotional distance, the steady flow of messages created a sense of connection she had not felt in a long time. She found herself slowly opening up, sharing parts of her life she had kept guarded for years. He explained that his work kept him outside India for long periods. According to him, his business involved overseas contracts and complex travel schedules. This distance was presented as temporary and unavoidable, something that would end once marriage plans were finalized. The explanation sounded logical and professional, fitting perfectly with the image he had built. Anjali accepted it without suspicion, believing that successful careers often came with complications. As days turned into weeks, his presence became a constant part of her routine. Morning messages greeted her before work, and long written updates filled her evenings. He spoke about shared futures, stability, and mutual respect, carefully avoiding unrealistic dreams. Everything felt mature and planned, not impulsive. Anjali began to feel chosen rather than targeted. Small inconsistencies did appear, but she dismissed them as misunderstandings caused by distance and time zones. She believed that overthinking would damage something promising. Trust once again began. The conversation gradually shifted from emotional connection to practical planning. Discussions about marriage became more frequent and detailed, focusing on timelines, responsibilities, and future arrangements. He emphasized how important it was to complete legal formalities before returning to India. According to him, unresolved documentation related to his overseas business was causing delays, and marriage could not proceed unless these matters were settled. The explanation sounded reasonable and carefully thought out. Soon, financial concerns were introduced gently. He described unexpected expenses linked to government clearances, tax adjustments, and business accounts that were temporarily frozen. He insisted these were short-term problems and promised complete transparency. Anjali listened carefully, her professional instincts alert but not alarmed. Everything was framed as procedural and temporary, nothing reckless or suspicious. The tone remained calm and reassuring. The first request for financial help was small. He presented it as a test of trust rather than a demand. Anjali hesitated but eventually agreed, believing that responsible partnerships required mutual support. The money was transferred with the understanding it would be returned quickly. When he thanked her and promised progress, her doubts softened. More requests followed, each slightly larger than the last. Every payment came with explanations, timelines, and assurances that marriage plans were moving forward. He spoke of future security, shared investments, and a comfortable life together. Anjali began viewing the money as a joint commitment rather than a loss. She justified the transfers as practical steps toward a stable future. Over time, her savings reduced significantly. Funds meant for emergencies and retirement were slowly drained. Despite this, she remained hopeful. She believed she was investing in a life partnership, not risking everything. The silence began without warning. Messages that once arrived daily stopped completely. Calls went unanswered, and emails showed no response. At first, Anjali assumed there was a technical problem or a sudden work emergency. She waited patiently, telling herself that panic would only make things worse. Days passed, and the quiet grew heavier. The absence felt louder than any argument could have been. As concern turned into fear, she began checking her phone constantly, replaying past conversations in her mind. Small details she had ignored now felt unsettling. Promised updates never arrived. Timelines he had once emphasized suddenly meant nothing. The sense of connection she had relied on vanished, leaving confusion and disbelief behind. She struggled to accept that someone so present could disappear so completely. Anjali started searching for answers on her own. She reviewed old messages, examined photographs, and searched names online. What she discovered felt like a second betrayal. The images linked to multiple profiles under different names. Stories similar to hers appeared on discussion forums, each describing emotional manipulation and financial loss. With every discovery, her hope collapsed further. The realization was devastating. She had not been unlucky or misunderstood. She had been deliberately targeted. Shame followed quickly, heavier than anger. She blamed herself for trusting, for ignoring warning signs, and for believing she was too careful to be deceived. The idea of explaining this to family or authorities felt unbearable. Silence became her shield. Her daily life began to fall apart. Sleep became difficult, work suffered, and her appetite disappeared. The emotional weight was constant, pressing down on her thoughts. She felt exposed and foolish, as if her private pain were visible to everyone around her. The disappearance marked the end of her illusion of safety. What remained was a deep sense of loss. The pain did not fade with time. Instead, it hardened into something darker and more focused. Anjali found it impossible to move forward or forget what had happened. The unanswered questions refused to leave her mind. She needed to know who had taken everything from her and how it had been done so easily. What began as an attempt to understand slowly turned into an obsession. She started spending hours online, reading articles about financial fraud and marriage scams. She joined anonymous groups where victims shared their experiences. Each story mirrored her own in unsettling ways. The patterns were clear, and the methods were repeated with precision. Rather than overwhelming her, this knowledge gave her direction. The chaos in her mind began to organize itself around one goal. Anjali analyzed every transaction she had made. She traced payment references, studied account details, and noted small inconsistencies that once seemed harmless. Her professional background helped her recognize deliberate structures behind the deception. The scam was not random or careless. It was systematic and practiced. This realization fueled her determination rather than discouraging her. Slowly, she uncovered fragments of information that others had missed. Similar bank details appeared across multiple complaints. Digital trails led to domestic locations rather than foreign ones. The man who had claimed to live abroad was operating much closer than she had imagined. Each discovery strengthened her belief that the truth was within reach. Her emotional state changed dramatically. Sadness gave way to anger, and anger turned into control. She stopped seeing herself as a victim waiting for justice. Instead, she viewed herself as the only person capable of uncovering the truth. This mindset isolated her further, cutting her off from normal life. By the time weeks had passed, Anjali was no longer seeking closure. She was seeking accountability. The pieces finally came together after months of quiet effort. Anjali identified a pattern that led her to a single individual operating under multiple false identities. The man was not hiding overseas as he had claimed. He was moving freely within the country, shifting locations and names to avoid detection. This discovery did not bring relief. It brought clarity, and with it, a dangerous sense of control. Instead of contacting authorities, Anjali made a calculated decision. She created a new online identity, carefully designed to appear wealthy, emotionally vulnerable, and recently widowed. Every detail was chosen with precision, from lifestyle descriptions to financial hints. She knew exactly what type of profile attracted scammers because she had once been one of their targets. The response was immediate. The same man reached out under yet another false name. This time, Anjali observed him closely, recognizing familiar patterns in his behavior. The emotional pacing, the gradual trust building, and the subtle introduction of financial discussions unfolded exactly as before. Watching the process from the other side strengthened her belief that she was in control. She slowed the interaction deliberately, forcing patience and increasing his interest. Instead of offering money, she suggested a business opportunity that required an in-person meeting. The idea appealed to his greed more than romance. A meeting was arranged at a private location, framed as a safe and profitable discussion. As the date approached, Anjali prepared meticulously. She erased digital traces of her real identity and memorized every detail of her fabricated life. She told no one about her plan. To her, this was not recklessness but completion. The months of research, anger, and isolation had led to this single moment. What Anjali did not fully acknowledge was how deeply her emotions were involved. Beneath the careful planning lay unresolved pain and rage. The meeting unfolded in a tense and unfamiliar setting, far from public attention. Anjali arrived composed, carrying the weight of months of planning and emotional restraint. The man appeared confident and unaware, behaving as if the situation was fully under his control. For a brief moment, everything remained calm, almost ordinary, as the reality of their shared past hung silently between them. As the interaction progressed, Anjali's emotions began to surface. Seeing the person responsible for her humiliation, financial ruin, and emotional collapse triggered memories she had tried to organize and suppress. The carefully constructed plan started to crack under the pressure of unresolved pain. What she had imagined as a controlled confrontation quickly shifted into something far more unpredictable. The truth of his deception became undeniable in that moment. There was no remorse, no fear, and no acknowledgement of the damage he had caused to countless lives. This realization shattered the last restraint holding Anjali together. The anger she had carried for months surged forward, overpowering logic and intention. The situation escalated rapidly, driven by raw emotion rather than reason. The encounter turned violent in a matter of moments. What followed was irreversible. When the chaos ended, the man lay lifeless, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything Anjali had experienced before. There was no sense of victory, only exhaustion and shock. The revenge she had believed would bring closure delivered only emptiness. Anjali did not attempt to escape. She remained at the scene, motionless and detached, as if the weight of her actions had finally grounded her in reality. When authorities arrived, she offered no resistance. Evidence surrounding the scene left little room for doubt about what had occurred. News of the death spread quickly, shocking those who later learned of the man's hidden criminal activities. For Anjali, the moment marked the end. The arrest drew national attention as details of the case slowly emerged. Investigators uncovered a long trail of financial fraud connected to the deceased, linking him to numerous victims across the country. Accounts, identities, and digital records revealed a pattern of deception that had operated unchecked for years. Anjali's actions, while criminal, exposed a network that might otherwise have continued harming others. Public reaction was sharply divided. Some viewed her as a woman driven beyond her limits by betrayal and emotional exploitation. Others focused on the fact that a life had been taken, regardless of the victim's crimes. Media coverage turned her story into a symbol of how loneliness and trust could be weaponized in the digital age. Her face appeared everywhere, often stripped of context and reduced to headlines. In court, the focus remained on the final act rather than the long path that led to it. The evidence against Anjali was clear and undeniable. Her months of planning, the false identity, and the arranged meeting all pointed toward intent. While the scammer's crimes were acknowledged, they did not erase the severity of her actions. Justice followed the letter of the law, not public emotion. Anjali received a long prison sentence. The ruling emphasized accountability over sympathy. Behind prison walls, her life became quiet again, but this time without hope or future plans. The routine she once knew returned in a harsher form, stripped of choice and freedom. Despite her fate, lasting consequences followed the case. Authorities used the uncovered information to dismantle several related fraud operations. Awareness around online marriage scams increased, preventing potential victims from falling into similar traps. Anjali's story ended not as a victory or redemption, but as a cautionary tale. It showed how betrayal could destroy trust, how obsession could replace reason, and how revenge, once pursued,